do a lecture for the presentation for the test. This is my first time doing this, so I'm just going to try to do it correctly. Let me see here. Okay. So this painting is Masaccio's The Tribute Money. It is really well discussed in the video from Khan Academy, so I'm just gonna cover the parts that I felt needed a little bit of work. It is suggested, the story is narrated in the video, so you know that this is Jesus, this is the tax collector, this is Peter, and the story is told in three parts. This is the main scene. This is scene number 2, in which Peter goes to get the coin from the mouth of the fish. And then this is when he pays the tax collector. And this is a very meaningful story because it tells us about the key moment in which Peter has to make a choice between following or having faith in Jesus or not, right? So it appeals to the followers of Christianity in that sense. It makes you feel identified with that question that you have to confront. The painting is a fresco, which is very important. One of the things that you might have noticed is that this blue here is very faded, and also this green. Perhaps, I don't know this for a fact, but it may be suggested, the same thing here, that this might have been painted with that ultramarine blue. Remember that I mentioned that in class. So that it might have faded. It might have been painted on with the fresco secco technique, and then maybe it flaked out or it faded, because the application of the color feels completely different from some of the reds, for example, or this garment that the tax collector is wearing. Another thing that I think needs some clarification is this atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective is the suggestion that, visual suggestion that objects that are at a distance are faded, right? So there is the atmosphere between our eyes and particularly mountains in this case that are far away, and so the edges are lighter and the colors are lighter, and we have again these mountains that are fairly dark are well defined, then these mountains that are less dark and somewhat less well defined, and then increasingly as we move into the background we have that same sensation. Another thing that helps with distance is this, which is called the winding line, right? This is the edge of the Sea of Galilee, and it is oriented, making this line. This is very interesting because it provides a way to suggest recession in nature. We had seen this already with the mountains in the Siena landscape, right? The Siena landscape. And here we have, of course, linear perspective, right? Which leads our eyes using a building. You always need some kind of straight line or marker in space that will suggest linear perspective. We have that modeling of the calves, as was discussed in the video very well. So there's also that. So the painting is really quite original and striking. It combines all of these methods, diminution also with the trees, right? Getting presumably smaller and shorter as they get further into the distance, but of course we know that those trees are going to be just as tall, one from the other, but they look smaller because they are far away. We also have the winding line, as I explained, the atmospheric perspective and the linear perspective and the modeling. All of these are techniques that are increasingly rooted in visual reality, that imply that the artist is paying attention to what is in front of his eyes. The same thing with the foreshortening of or again, the perspective, let's say, put onto the halos. Finally, one thing that is really important is, again, that the key moment in the story is here, right? In this interaction, it's that decision of Peter to decide to go and have faith in Jesus, something quite, what Jesus tells Peter is that you will find this coin in the mouth of a fish. Of course, that is, needless to say, very unlikely. And as a result, initially, Peter does not believe, but then eventually Jesus insists and he has faith. So again, this is the vanishing point. In the linear perspective, this is where our eyes are always going to go. And of course, that communicates the message, right? That tells us that Jesus is the most important figure. So it preserves that focus on Christianity, regardless of the fact that there's increasingly this focus on reality, on earthly perceptions rather than heavenly. The next work that was also fairly well explained, but again, I think it needs a little bit more elaboration, is this one. This is the Camera Picta, which, as far as I know, it's the room of the newlyweds, therefore a bedroom, right? And that makes a lot of sense because it's kind of a joke onto these newlyweds who are probably doing what newlyweds do in their bedroom. And so we have all these playful babies, which are actually called cherubs, right? Cherubs are not angels. They are these creatures of classical antiquity that are young babies. They are little cupids. There's, of course, a very special cupid, but then there were all these other babies with wings. And the idea is that they are playful. They are mischievous, actually. And there are some really funny things going on here. There's this baby, for example, who seems to have put his head through the balustrade and now cannot retrieve it, right? And so he's stuck. Same thing with this one, who seems to be screaming, and this one here. These ones are throwing things like, I don't know, a stick, a ball, or a stone. This one's throwing, again, a wreath. Each of them is doing something mischievous. Then, as it was mentioned in the video, there's this potted plant, very precariously placed in there. And it seemingly it might be falling onto the newlyweds, right? So all of that is very, very interesting. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of this painting is the perspective, the linear perspective. Here, I have always suspected, even though I've never read it anywhere, that this might be like a bird in flight seen from below. And then these are all the orthogonals that go to this point, right? And they are aligned or suggested, not as obviously, but nevertheless quite significantly aligned with these edges of the balustrade, right? And that's what you see. So this is what we call illusionism as a term. We have discussed several terms in class: naturalism, realism, idealization, right? And then now we have illusionism. Illusionism refers more clearly to this representation of space. The idea that we might jump into this space, or we might believe that this space is coming towards us, that you know, it is related not so much with representing small objects or even faces of people in a realistic way, but suggesting this illusion as if we could jump onto the space. And this particular point of view is called the sotto in su, or from below upwards, as it's said in the Khan Academy video. And again, it is rather original. No other artist had done it, right? It uses this illusion. Remember that all of this is painted, which is rather spectacular, truly. And so it uses this illusion of space with all the orthogonals that lead in towards this vanishing point, again represented, in my opinion, as a bird in flight seen from below. And there are all these figures again that provide entertainment, There was no TV in the Renaissance, so this provided good entertainment for this particular occasion. It's playful, it's